Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Youth Day webinar, June 2022. And whenever I say welcome, I normally say a warm welcome to everyone, but I really can't say a warm welcome to everyone because Durban's really experiencing quite cold weather today, and I'm sure Joburg is just as bad. So I'm not going to say a warm welcome, but I'm sure the discussion is going to be quite a warm and interesting one. So very quickly, if we look back and we reflect on June 16th, 1976, we know that there was an uprising that began in Soweto and it spread countrywide. And the impact of that was a change in the socio-political landscape in South Africa. Those events triggered the uprising can be traced back to many policies that had to be re-looked at. But the one we're focusing on today is the one that gave rise to the change in the language policy, which was then obviously, even in the constitution, giving some paramount importance around language rights. And we know that the uprising was all about an opposition and a protest against having to study in a language that was foreign to many of the students who were having to study that. And of course, again, in South Africa, when we embraced a constitutional democracy in 1994, and which was finalized by our constitution in 1996, it has a whole lot of provisions in the Bill of Rights, but the focus we have is on Section 6, which is rights relating to language. And of course, Section 6 merely talks about the fact that there are various different languages, 11 to be precise, that are now recognized as official languages in South Africa. And proceeding from the Department of Education had to also amend its policies around language, etc. But now we stand back and we look again at language and we ask ourselves, is the language of the Constitution and what was referred to in the Constitution in terms of recognizing 11 official languages, is that the language of the 21st century? Can those 11 languages suffice our students? Does it make them employable? Does it give them skills? And it starts to lead us into something totally different. That is that we now need to redefine and relook at language and what rights they are. If we look at the national theme for Youth Day this year, and June is regarded as Youth Month, then it talks about a very specific theme. The year of Charlotte Munirah Makeke, growing youth employment for an inclusive and transformed society. And you may raise the question, I wanted to know, who is Charlotte Makeke? Because I didn't know, and I'm happy to say that this made me think about who she is and why were we remembering her in terms of this. So Charlotte was a South African religious leader, social and political activist, and this is the key why we want to remember her. She was the first Black woman to graduate with a university degree in South Africa, with a BSc degree from the University of Ohio later, as well as the first Black African woman to graduate from an American university. So that's why this year we have decided to pay homage to her. And at RBS, we have interpreted this theme for tonight's session to look at a very burning question. And what is that question that we want to deal with? Is higher education addressing the language of the 21st century? And to unpack this question, we have put together two guests for you who are going to talk to us about different aspects of this particular theme. Our very first guest is Dr. Maropeng, Mpya, and also an advocate at the Johannesburg Bar. And he's going to talk to us about a very interesting topic, language is power and the mother of Black freedom. Before I hand over to Dr. Mpya, let me just say a few words about him. And I'm very happy that when I approached him and invited him to speak tonight, he was also willing to be a guest on this webinar. Dr. Mpya and I used to be colleagues at UKZN Law School, and today we sit together at a webinar, and I'm really, really happy to have him here with us. He's currently an advocate at the chambers in Johannesburg, and he holds a Bachelor of Laws degrees, and I think that comes without saying. He's a lawyer. And I think something to note is that he obtained his Master's of Law degree cum laude, and that's quite an achievement to achieve. And he also holds a PhD from our erstwhile university, UKZN. Now, what I am very, very in awe of when it comes to Dr. Mpya, beside him being this grand orator, I've seen him orate, and he's a grand orator, and he has a wonderful social background, and he's a good friend, and you can talk to him and all of these things, and he's an academic and an intellectual. But I love what he says at the end of his CV. He says his ethos is service to humanity. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mpya to now chat to you on his topic.
Thank you so much, my dear sister. Allow me to thank you for reaching out to me, and also congratulate you in front of everyone for your position. It's really evidence of your hard work and the reason why you head of school at Regent Business School. And also let me thank my fellow brother, Mr. Ignitius Molepo, who will deal with the issues of fourth industrial revolution. And hopefully I'll have some bit of time to give an opinion on such particular matter. And thank you so much for your glowing words, my dear sister. I really appreciate it. Indeed, we worked together and we formed a very strong bond. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to the topic at hand, I had entitled it, Language is Power and the Mother of Black Freedom. And I will start with the mother of Black freedom, which is Manye Mahomu Matleke. And the significance of starting at this point, ladies and gentlemen, it's to pay homage to one of the great, not only intellectual giants, but people who have really walked the talk, as it were. But before I get there, allow me to join the country in mourning the tragedy that has befelled our youth. And I connect this Eastern Cape tragedy with the fact that what Regent Business School has set in relation to the year of Charlotte Maxeke, it's that it will be for growing youth employment, for an inclusive and transformed society. And in that regard, it's very important then to mention this tragedy wherein children as young as 13 years old have died in a tavern. And certainly in a youth month, wherein we ought to be celebrating the youth of 1976, we are now crying about children who died in a tavern and not protesting against electricity that we all now suffering, healthcare that it's now in a state of disarray, and that should trigger something in our minds. Allow me to leave that topic right there. The name Makhomu, which is the middle name of Charlotte Maxeke, in my native language, which she comes from, in Polokwane, it means the mother of cows. But that literally, or the syntax of it, it's that you are the mother of everyone. You are the mother of the nation. You are a person of immense care to your people and the nation. And that name is important because she became her namesake, and she became the mother of freedom on all aspects. Now, my sister Munirah Osman has said her CV, but let me touch on a very important point. Part of the reason why she resonated with the people, it's primarily because she used the language that the people understood. Despite her United States education, despite being an intellectual, despite knowing all the theories, she touched down to the normal person on the ground. And that's why we today revere her, because if her education had made her elitist, we would not be speaking about her today. Thus, the importance of language and the relation of knowledge to the ordinary man and women on the street becomes a pivotal point in how we use our education to minister to our young people. And higher education is the pinnacle of that point, wherein our elitist education must then speak to the ordinary person on the street. And to that extent, Ms. Maxeke played an important role in utilizing the language, her own language, be it Pedi and Xhosa, to speak to the masses of South Africa and be an agent of change. And if there's something that we must take from that, it is that no matter what your position in life is, how much education you have acquired, it is important that it resonates with the people on the ground, so that it is not only an education in the boardrooms of corporate South Africa at the high echelons of society. Let me leave the topic there. Frantz Fanon once said, to speak a language is to take on a world, a culture. You would have seen on the media release that I've stated that language is power. Indeed, language is power, ladies and gentlemen. For every civilization that was conquered, from Indonesia to Africa, every place that it was conquered, language was the first thing that the colonizers did or imposed. And the 1976 uprising, or the June 16 uprising, is symptomatic of this particular phenomenon. So the colonizers knew incredibly well that in order to dominate a society, you needed to give them your own language. That way, they abandon their own ways, they abandon culture, they abandon their own language, they vilify who they are, because the new episteme and the new ontology of the acquired language from the oppressor changes the entire mentality of how a colonized person sees the world. You begin, as I've always stated to my student, you begin to love in a language that is foreign to you. You begin to dream in a language that is foreign to you. You begin to think in a language that is foreign to you. And no wonder that years later, in all conquered world, we do not know who we are. And I am certainly a product of such phenomenon. Therefore, what do we then do in today's world? Let me give you an example of the uprising in Soweto. And in actual fact, it wasn't Soweto alone, but it was all over South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the youth of that particular generation realized and knew very well that the dominance of one language over the other means the debasement of who you are with your language. And that's why they fought so incessantly about Afrikaans. And I dare say perhaps they should have even went further with English as well, because we somewhat deem it as a super language as opposed to Afrikaans. All of them are colonial languages, and none of them should have any other particular predominance either in higher education or elsewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sad to give you this story. When I was in KZN, and this goes to the language being power. When I was in KZN, I did not know how to speak isiZulu very well, but I've learned and I tried. But the problem came here And I'm ashamed of the story. It is true. And perhaps it will demonstrate the power of language. Whenever I would be confronted with a situation wherein perhaps I sought entry to a particular building, and then there were security officers there, I knew very well what the prejudice against me would have been as a person who was a non-isiZulu speaker. I would have been thought, because as evident, I'm rich and endowed with melanin. And the prejudice against foreigners, it has always been anyone who looks like them will then be will be prejudiced on various levels. Knowing this and not having the time to debate with security personnel about what I'm doing there, I would invoke the English or the Queen's language. I would speak it so clearly and so loudly and so confidently that I knew that my fellow brother, who's an isiZulu speaking person, after I've said whatever I've said, I will see his head shake and he has no choice but to allow me to that particular building. And I knew very well it is the power of the Queen's language that enabled me to make that man open the door faster than I would have tried to speak in isiZulu. If I had attempted, he would have right away noticed that I'm not a Zulu speaker. And then I would be barraged with thousands of questions as to who I am, what am I doing there, even though I'm lawfully entitled to get to acquire entry to that. It's a sad indictment on what we've become and how language, it is increasingly important. Allow me to quote another speaker on this particular point by the name of Gayatri Spivak. She's an Indian literary theorist and a feminist critic. And she says the following with respect to language and literature. She says, we seem to have won or lost in terms of certainties. We must, as a literature teachers in the classroom, remember such warnings. Let literature teach us that there are non-certainties, that the process is open, and that it may be altogether salutary that it is so. Ladies and gentlemen, the issue of language in the 21st century, and more particularly in higher education, has not changed. The reason why you and I converse in English, it's because we are conquered by the English. And thus we speak English and we teach in English. Let me disabuse you of the notion that intellectualism has to do with the language that we speak. The Chinese do not speak English, yet they are #1 economy in the world. The Germans could not care less about English, but yet they're the biggest economy in Europe. Therefore, if you were lied like I was lied to, that the better I speak English, the more I will survive in the world, that is but a fallacy. The fact of the matter is, if we were to teach each and every language in our mother tongue language, we would be better off than to try to learn the dialectics of other languages. Yes, I recognize that we live in the 21st century. My sister summed up beautifully the constitutional imperatives. And in section 6, subsection 2 of the Constitution, it employs you and I to ensure that the diminished languages, which is African languages, must then be brought to the fore. I'm sad to announce that that is just but a pipe dream. It won't happen anytime soon because we have told ourselves that English, it's the international language, and thus we'll stick to it for every little thing that we do. But allow me to tell you what Ngugi wa Thiong'o said, a literary giant in African literature. He said, sometimes the simple act of speaking in your mother tongue can be a revolutionary gesture. And I agree with him. Not only was Ungungi Watyonge jailed for having a play in Kikuyu, which is his language, he was also jailed for writing in his own mother tongue language. Now, do you understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the blood that has been spilled in June 16 over a language, it is not something that we can take for granted and state that no, in the 21st century, language no longer matters. I've always stated when I was still at UKZN to my fellow Indian brothers and sisters, especially those who are doing law, and I said, have you watched the JSC interviews? Ladies and gentlemen, we must come to a point wherein we are able to speak and converse in each other's language, at least to a limited extent, to show that you're trying. For I've warned them that one day you will come before us at the JSC, and then you will be asked, you are fourth generation or third generation Indian. You've been amongst the Zulus for all this time. Can you greet in isiZulu? You want to become a judge and preside over Zulus. Can you speak and understand their language? And if you say no, we will quote the Constitution. We will quote all manner of laws, and we will say to you, but the Constitution and all the enabling acts says that you must be community orientated, or at least know about your environment. And failure to understand those things makes you incompetent because you would not know. And the similar warning, it's to all of us. Language, I think it was Nelson Mandela who said, if you speak in a man's language, you touch their heart. It is true. I employ that particular strategy every time because I understand that to speak your language, it's to see you. It's to acknowledge that you are diverse and you bring something different than I am. But that difference, it's a beautiful difference. But for as long as we do not understand and realize that as things goes on, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Language is still power. My sister again alluded to the point of, can we be in our little silos wherein we do not, or perhaps we might not find employment if we are not, let's say, acute in the Queen's language. I say, no, we create our own futures. In actual fact, think about this for a second. Have you realized that if I, as a petty man from Limpopo, was running 60% of the industries in South Africa, you would learn Sepedi so that you can be amongst my employees. Therefore, language is positional and it's also an issue of power. But my talk is to tell you that it shouldn't be the case. However, if we allow it and not live up to the constitutional prescripts wherein we must develop our own languages, then we'll be found in a position wherein we have to desperately learn other people's languages in order to survive. I often give this example that I broke my father's heart when he impressed upon me to learn Afrikaans as deeply as I could. And I said to my father, I will not do such a thing. I will learn each language that I choose to, but I will not do it because I will be beholden to a buota someday who will employ me. And I saw the disappointment in his eyes, wherein he couldn't understand. But the simple point that he was making was that, son, I had to survive because I spoke Afrikaans very well. But I say to all of us, that should not be the case. Listen to what S.K. Mphahlele says in his lasting tribute work. Literature has seldom been taught as a social cultural act, an act of language, an act of self-knowledge. It has been, and it's still being, taught as a specialized body of knowledge, far removed from the doings and vocabulary of human beings in a familiar environment in contemporary times. Under the circumstances, learners are not inspired, cannot feel the story they are reading. It is indeed true. I agree with SK Mpya on this particular one. I always tell my LLB students and everyone who cares to listen, have you not realized that as a young lawyer, you are more prowess in your practice of law in Sandton, where I'm sitting at this particular moment, in Umhlanga, where you hope to be, better than you do in Chatsworth, in Umlazi, in Bumbulu. The reason is because you have learned law in the language that it's not yours. You can only be proficient wherein money and the language comes from. And that's Umhlanga, and that is Sandton and the elsewhere of the posh areas of our places. And that particular thinking must change, ladies and gentlemen, because the more we give parity to all languages, the more we are able to be interconnected and share our culture through the language and teach various ways. When I was in KZN, I used to speak about Hindi. My fellow Indian brothers and sisters who were of the Muslim faith, I would greet them in the salutation of Assalamu alaikum, because I understand what that means. And it is the language, it is the diversity within which I would want us to interchange the languages that we hope for. I'm about to run out of time. Let me touch on my brother's topic. The 21st century languages, it's transcend through communicative linguistic dialectic. In here, I invoke the language of algorithms and programming. I don't know if you know, but my brother Ignitius should know that when face recognition technology was started, it could not recognize a black face such as myself. The racism was embedded in the coding of computers. Therefore, and that's not only the problem, the technology that we hope, it's language from computers and algorithms and programming that we think it's modernity and it's evolving, in actual fact, has the same vestiges and remnants of prejudices embedded in it. I don't blame the people who created such things. Up until you and I, who are Black, and I use the Black in the constitutional sense, not African, Black, Indian, so-called colored, which are quiescents. I mean, we must also program so that the apps and the programs speaks to our own languages. Thus, as we enter the fourth industrial revolution, I have bad news to you. If we don't take charge of this particular linguistic development of computers, you would still be left behind and you'd have facial recognition as the easy thing, not recognizing you as a brown-skinned human being. And the defects of it, it's because we are not the creators of that particular technology. As I conclude, I don't know if you know the coat of arms that South Africa has, but it reads as follows. And this is from the Khoi dialect of the Ngam people. It says, Ike ishare ke, meaning diverse people unite. If anything that you can take from this particular talk is that language in higher education must evolve. It must be inclusive. And most importantly, we should never employ the language or all of our languages as power that dominate over others. And we must fight against it. And therefore, I say to all of them, Ike ishara ke. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maropeng. You've exceeded my expectations this evening. Thank you very, very much. And I'm sure your talk is going to inspire some questions as they come along. Our next guest is Mr. Ignitius Molepo. And to introduce Mr. Molepo to you, we have Dr. Priyanka Mudli from Regent Business School, and she's the coordinator of the Doctorate of Business Administration program, working very, very closely with our guest this evening on his doctorate. And so she's in a very, very good place to actually introduce the guest to us. And very, very quickly, his topic that he will be addressing is Bridging the Gap in 21st Century Language.
Thank you, Mrs. Osman. Good evening, esteemed colleagues. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce my doctoral student, Mr. Ignitius Molepo. Mr. Molepo has been exceptionally busy in the last few weeks, as he'll attest to that. I've had him do several tasks and several assignments as he continues with his academic journey with, in my opinion, the utmost confidence. Mr. Molepo actually started from humble beginnings, but it truly shows that with great passion and support from those around you, you can really achieve your highest potential. He's truly an inspiration and an ambassador to the youth of South Africa. He'll be traveling to Germany soon for the Lindau Nobel Laureate and to further his doctoral research. So, Mr. Molepo, if I can hand over to you. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As Dr. Mudli has spoken, my topic is bridging gaps of 21st century languages. I would like to take some of words from my colleague who has, Dr. Mpya, who just spoke now, which shows that, from my understanding, is that we need to prepare ourselves from higher education for fourth industrial revolution, as we are the imitator of the future. We are the people who are supposed to cook the current youth to the future. I saw doing that by introducing to you the fourth industrial revolution. But as a matter of fact, what is the language? To our understanding, as a fourth industrial revolution or as 21st century youth, language is a vehicle of communication that can be used to express and interact the situation between the political, commercial, as well as the education systems. But the language within the fourth industrial revolution is a key to the point where it lands itself at the center of the articulation and analysis. So analyzing everything within the fourth industrial revolution needs the analysis. We talk from the computer systems to the robotic. Even the human being who are using those fourth industrial technologies, they need to analyze them first. So by so doing, I'm introducing the fourth industrial revolution as a part of a topic itself. Has developed an artificial intelligence, genetic technology, 3D and 4D printing, biotechnology, and the smart system of the smart systems, as well as the technology, as well as the smart cell phones. So some may ask themselves, what is the language in fourth industrial revolution? It's just the current development of environment in which the change of the technology and trend, such as the Internet of the Thing, artificial intelligence, which embedded the physical and digital biological world to change our way of living and improve our work. By drawing the multitude of advanced technologies and fourth industrial blurring between the physical, digital, and biological world. By introducing the smart home, farm, cities, service delivery as easy, as faster and technologies, that is part of what we are talking about as fourth industrial revolution. Technology that affect the 21st century's lives for everyone in security, transport, effect, as well as safety and financial health and other spectrum. Let's look at the content of the technology. What is the technology from olden age to the technology nowadays in fourth industrial revolution? Technology at the olden age, it was there just to help for making the bulb of a candle. But nowadays, technology is helpful to the position where even us as the creator of those technologies were not even able to control or explain what it is doing. The digital age demand on a different approach these days. It's no longer the same way as what happened in 1976 and also at the time of Mama Shel Mateke. No. In a nutshell, we're now in a disruptive era where the technology disrupts everything. We're in a level where we are now able to go to work with the robotic, and we start to adopt the robots as our siblings, co-workers, as well as our daughters and sons, because the technology increases in a high speed. Back there, we used to have these other phones with the antenna, big antenna, but nowadays, my colleague just mentioned that we have smartphones which they don't even able to recognize our face, which is true. It's not a lie. Why? Because that smartphone we have been built in, the algorithm within doesn't know the black person. The algorithm within knows only a human framework, not the black or white or Indian or whatever the color. So hence that is why we need to start building our own in Africa so that we can be able to be recognized and be able to utilize our gadget. For the industrial revolution in South Africa have dealt with a lot of issues. Even now in COVID-19, we've seen some of artificial intelligence and Internet of the Thing diagnosis machine, which were very useful within the big hospitals to diagnose our patients within who were infected. This is a disruptive era of a technology which will on itself is a development trajectory that Africa and world need to embrace and sustain competitive advantage of occurrence of imprisonment. But looking at the modern technologies, what is it modern technologies doing? It's paving a way of multifunctional devices like the smartphone, smartwatch, computers that are increasing the speed. Now, very soon, we are now at the 5G. Very soon we'll be in a 6G, the speed of the network, more portable and higher power than before. The revolution of the technology has made a life easier and faster and better and more fun. That is what we're enjoying. And most of the time, social media, we're now able to meet because we're not physical, but we are meeting physically through the computer, through the digital and technology. The fourth industrial revolution saw the biggest surge in resolving the information asymmetric problems in the financial system and the labor market, increasing the efficiency, certainly as a security and environment information flows. This is the technology of nowadays. And looking at the technology of fourth industrial revolution. What are the technology of fourth industrial revolution? We're talking about the Internet of a Thing. We're talking about artificial intelligence, where we are talking about the place of the algorithms, because we are the people who are supposed to create those robots. We are the people who are supposed to create that smartphones and tell you that smartphone tell you that you must recognize the black face, because the black face must be equal to the variable in a programming language. That is where you talk about autonomous robotic simulation and system integration, as well as cybersecurity, because another thing which we need to also consider into the technology is a security. People, we are now afraid of using technology because it's not safe. Cybersecurity is also a concern, which everyone is supposed to be for everyone's responsibility. We're also using the cloud computing. COVID-19, as it has come to become a disruptive to the position where all the companies, even the higher education institutions, even the banks are being forced to move to the cloud. And who will be operating them from the cloud is the youth of nowadays. So what do we need there? We need the skills. We need to learn this technology. The big data technology also, 3D and 4D printing. We must get away from the manual doing things. We must get away from the old age of doing our analysis. So the technology is here to enhance us. It's not here to fight, to be competitive to us. It's here to enhance what we're supposed to do. And let's look at the fourth industrial revolution at work. We were now forced to attain to the model of agility. Agility is when you're working anywhere, at any time. You are not forced to go to the offices nowadays. Banks are able to operate from anywhere, anytime. You are not forced to do anything, go physically to the ATM. You can do the banking wherever you are. So we are now in the fourth industrial revolution. We are in an era where we are supposed to chair a meeting with a robotic and make the use of that computer to enhance our protection. In addition of the role of the new roles and the responsibilities, the fourth industrial revolution could also lead more companies employing the special contractors, remote workers due to the new technology and change demand. Employers may also become more supportive of existing employees wanting to work remote and flexibility. The meaning the spectrum of working is changing. That habit of apartheid or that habit of 1976 of micromanaging everyone, looking at everyone wherever they're entering to the offices and sitting right into their bag for them to operate is no longer going to work. Here we're going to work flexible nowadays. A fourth industrial revolution continue reshaping the work and the businesses. And also businesses, there is a must on the businesses to be empowering the new employer. The new workforces now is getting right into the businesses. They will be doing so by upskilling, continue learning onto this, because technology increasingly, I can say this, I want the proper way into this one. It disrupts in an exponential graph. I'm sorry to include the exponential graphs because I'm more into mathematics before I can become into the business world. So looking at the skills, what are the skills we should learn from fourth industrial revolution? The 21st century has 4 C's, skills which they should be learned in any academic. We have the first one, communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. The other skills like the adaptive and initiative and leadership, they come as the compensative to these ones. And also we need to incorporate our skills into data sciences, into the office admin and business management, IT technical and services engineering, IT web systems, and also the Google Cloud, iCloud, Microsoft Azure. Those are the skills we need to incorporate ourselves into this era of fourth industrial revolution. While developing that skill of fourth industrial revolution, allowing the student to become, those skills are not only based into the academic as before with the 1976 era. Those skills, they also enable us as a youth to continue our life to meet the future. We are now becoming what we call a global citizen. We are making a globe to become a village where you can just be able to interact even anyone everywhere across the globe. But another challenge is that let's look at how does the higher education institution approach fourth industrial revolution. The universities, they are now forced to shape the future of the technology by being test bed of innovation and education future regeneration. Traditional education has contributed greatly to the current level of the industrial revolution, technology advance, and however, in order to make sure that the education delivered in future to generate with the rights of the skills and the knowledge, imperative of the question has to be asked regarding on how high education institution can be affected by the fourth industrial revolution. Combining the two, the traditional way of teaching and using the new model of opening up multi-open online courses, which they will identify a good identity of the belonging of the future. That is the best way where higher education institution should resurrect onto. We need to see a lot of online courses which they will just take us to make a globalization of online learning, total excellency, as well as qualitative colleges and innovation ecosystem and the global prominences. The higher education systems and the leaders, they shouldn't see themselves as a risk, or they shouldn't see themselves on a risk path. They should embrace the less risk and avail the special into this world of the destructive changes. Improve the way innovation, improving the way of innovation, accepting the change are now prerequisite for the survivor. Although the digital higher education can be more affordable compared to the other education options, the best to reach under self-population where the education can serve strong, empowerable, and change the two. And the first thing is to understand that higher education institutions are the mediator between the old history as well as the future. We need to make sure that we have a learned value-driven talent that will enable the good outcomes of the future, where we're gonna meet the new generation or even the fifth generation, fifth industrial revolution, in where we're going to be colleagues with the robotic, and anything will be into the technology. And looking at how does the fourth industrial revolution impacted South Africa? Yes. Fourth industrial revolution impacted South Africa beyond the productive, not only beyond the productivity improvement, also becoming a sign of hope in South Africa social development challenges. It offers the opportunity of a transformation, growth, improvement of the both government and organization and professionalism. It's already happening now, guys. We need to just start adapting ourselves, start engaging ourselves with this high impact. It's already impacting the road safety. It's already impacting the banking, healthcare, and other industries. The fourth industrial revolution transformed the economy has been based on agriculture and handcraft economy based of the large industries, multinational companies, merchandise manufacturers, and also and others. We are also in a case of climate change, which is a negative impact of the fourth industrial revolution. But the fourth industrial revolution is there to assist us to build a massive, smart cities. Also, is there to increase the urbanization, excessive deforestation, and limit the depletion. The industrial revolution has also been disruptive in nature, as alluded before, that the phenomenon has added the new 21st century language and concept that needs to adapt it in the world, and the world needs to adapt in a disruptive manner. But looking at that, are we ready for this fourth industrial revolution from South Africa? We are not. But the question is where to start. We need to start by building the infrastructure. We need to start by having the awarenesses, leading the young child to be able to learn the programming at the young age. I would like to share another story which I've experienced when I grew up. I come from rural area at Ramelapo, Ramagano. It's 2G Gaga. That area where I come from, there were no signal from the FESCO. And the case is, I need to pass matric and go to the higher education. When I went to the higher education, I wanted to affiliate myself as a policeman or a soldier, because that was only the career which we used to be informed about. And when I get to the higher institution, they tell me that, no, man, you can still have a good taste here with computer science and statistics and other mathematics. I was very shocked because it was the first time I met that information when I'm in university already. And it was the first time typing on the computer, seeing a computer by my own eyes. At the same time, I must make sure that I program that computer to be able to communicate to me the same way as it's doing now. It was quite challenging, but I saw that as a gap, that there is a gap from where we come from, primary and the secondary levels. We need to learn the programming. We need to start engaging on the gadgets. We're now opting to approach the fifth industrial revolution, which will now be the interdependencies of machine learning and artificial intelligences. But we're not ready yet. And who's supposed to make us ready is the education system. The education system is supposed to make us ready for the next industrial revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molepo. Thank you. I have to say that was a really foreign language for me, much of what you spoke about. And I had to go really slowly with my thought processes to try and understand what you were saying. We don't have too much of time and we have a few questions. So I would just appeal to our guests when answering the questions to try and be as brief as possible so that we can get a little bit of the questions answered. The very first one is directed at Advocate Mpya. The guest says that I was much interested with the conclusion of Advocate Maropeng about the fourth industrial revolution. Isn't that the right time Department of Education should start with enrolling coding as a module, I think, from foundation phase, so that young age can grow up able to develop apps which will speak our language? And I just want to add to that, Maropeng. So that's starting at a very, very basic level, right? But if you look at current language policy at UKZN, for example, you're not able to graduate with a degree unless you have isiZulu. Now, is it possible to say that you should not graduate unless you have fourth industrial language skills or whatever the case might be? But let's hear from you.
You are correct. Hopefully they do that. However, I have much sympathy for my brother Ignitius. And I will answer this thing of coding at basic level and whether we have infrastructure to do it in possibly 1 minute. The short answer is this. Look, for as long as we in the African continent do not create or utilize these resources to advantage, unfortunately, we're not going to get anywhere. And I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I'm old enough to know the age of ICT when it was introduced. Nothing much has become of it from an empowerment point of view. And allow me to stick to my guns and state, unfortunately, the powers of resources and capitalism and where these technologies come from still reside in the West. And no matter how much exceptional Mr. Molepo and his crew might be in terms of bringing this technology to Africa and South Africa, it's a drop in the ocean. And I'm afraid we will still remain consumers for the longest time, whether as a matter of force or because we have not empowered ourselves to do so. So to a large extent, just as one warning, remember the Facebook Cambridge Data Analytica scandal, where elections were manipulated in the United States. Remember that people in China are being persecuted on the basis of surveillance. I have a very negative view of technology. And lastly, one person once said, can we not use technology to calculate big data, to calculate how many people are on Earth so that we can begin a program of eliminating others who might not be useful? And that broke my heart because it was at a university big data lecture. And if those things are prevalent in technology, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Maropeng. Okay, we have another question which I'm going to direct to Mr. Molepo. It's actually not just one question. I've been looking at some of the questions and I'm going to put them into one for you to respond since the time is really, really short. So the one is around the fact is whether we have enough resources to be able to address the question of infrastructure that you raised. And secondly, it's a question of accessibility to such resources. So for example, COVID-19 pandemic has forced the world, as the one question says, to leapfrog into the fourth or fifth industrial revolution in a manner that we were not prepared for. So are our youth that privileged to have access to these vital technologies? And going on with one more question that arose from that is that, is not access to all of these technologies increasing the crime rate? So if you could just touch on those last three, that would be the last comments from you, and then we're going to close up.
I will start with the first one. Is the assessment of the technology doesn't increase the crime. It does increase the crime rate. And that is why we need to teach the communities about the cybersecurity, about the criminal offense on a cyber state. Because, and also we need to have a prosecution on cyber state. We don't have a clear cyber law within South Africa as I'm speaking now. Anyone can do whatever he wants, wherever he is, and he will never be prosecuted and been sentenced to a jail. Because the case with the security case is that, let's take an example of WhatsApp. WhatsApp is very encrypted. Now I can just put a picture of Barack Obama, for instance, and text you and say, I love you, miss you, I send you all the nude pictures. Will you say it's a Barack Obama who texts you? So hence, we still need to go deeper on studying into this framework of a cyber, because there are lots of sorts of frameworks which we need to adapt to resolve our case of security first, number one. On the case of the accessibility, yes, now there's an accessibility. I can agree to you that there is an accessibility. It's just that we are been having a stand block of a skill. Youth, they are able to use the smartphone, all of them. Even my 5-year child is able to use the smartphone, but is a case of, the challenge is a case of the whoever who's teaching that youth doesn't have the skill. Like if I can take the June 16, 1976 elder and take him, put him here with the 2000 young fellow, the 2000 young fellow will be able to maneuver around with the technology. But that person who's there has been employed as an educator doesn't have that skill. And we need to make sure that we give the proper skill into, and I like the point, the point which stated by Dr. Mpya says, if you speak with someone with his language, you speak to his heart, meaning that we need to change this spectrum now and teach them accordingly within the 11 languages we have in South Africa. Like for instance, when I went to higher education, on my second year, I became a tutor. And I started to tutor mathematics. And I realized that in the first quarter, I realized that when these people are writing tests, they're filling all of them. And I'm in the University of Limpopo, where the language dominant is Spedi, it's my language. And I turned and talked in my language. Those students now they passed. I started to tell what is integration, translated integration to my language, differentiation to my language. Those people, they start to pass. So we need to speak in their languages so that they can be able to adapt these gadgets and be useful to the better. And it's within us. It is our responsibility to train each other on the responsibility of using the gadgets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Molepo. Clearly, there's a lot of hard work for us to engage in. This is not just about higher education, although the question we raised is higher education addressing the question of the 21st century language. But as can be seen now, we have to start right from the bottom, early childhood development, etc. And of course, it's not just about the language that we originally understood what language was, but it's about how language is developing and how now in the fourth industrial revolution, and as we say, we're on the brink of the fifth industrial revolution, I fear to think what that language is going to be. But anyway, we have a lot to do. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Advocate Mpya, Mr. Molepo for making themselves available and sharing information with us. Thank you, Dr. Kranka Mudli, for spending the evening with us. To our admin team and all of you, thank you very much. And thank all of you for attending and making this a successful discussion evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Osman. Thank you. Evening, everyone.